Suppose you use software to manage all your endpoints, and this software is regularly updated, of course. But now in the news you hear that this software itself, that update that you always install, is compromised. It spreads malware all of a sudden. What do? Can you protect against that? That's the subject of today's Threat Talk. Thank you for joining. My name is Liewe Jan Koning, and here from the Security Operations Center floor at MOVEit, we bring you Threat Talks. And the subject of today is supply chain attacks. Let's get onto it.
Welcome to Threat Talks. Let's delve deep into the dynamic world of cybersecurity.
Let me first welcome our guests. First of all, Matthijs Zwart. Welcome. He is the CIO and the CISO of Vitens. And Vitens is a tap water company in the Netherlands, and they are responsible to produce a whopping 90 billion gallons of fresh water every year. Matthijs, welcome. When you are on holiday in a foreign country, do you also drink tap water?
I first check whether it's advisory to drink, but most of the times I don't.
Really? Interesting. We'll hear about that more, I guess. And on my other side, Luca Cipriano, he's a threat intel specialist at MOVEit. And yes, he is an A-class nerd, but he also has the gift to explain these difficult supply chain attacks to us in layman's terms. So looking forward to that. Luca, welcome. Talking about supply chain, do you have a supply chain for your password management? Do you use a cloud service? For your password, for example?
Yes, I don't host myself my password manager yet. I use a couple, and yes, indeed, you have to trust sometimes.
Well, that's some good news, because apparently, if this guy trusts supply chain, then there's ways to do so. So in this episode, we are going to talk about supply chain. What is a supply chain? What kind of attacks do we see? What is the role for Vitens in this, and how do they defend against attacks in the supply chain? What measures can you take? That's our main topic of today. We'll also dive into 3 different supply chain attacks that we've seen, that we have experienced in recent months and years: SolarWinds, Log4j, and MOVEit. And of course, as you're used to by now, we have a threat hunt for you. So somewhere in this talk, there's going to be a code. And if you send it to us, you'll get a very cool t-shirt. It's the same that Luca is currently wearing. So look out for that. Matthijs, once again, welcome.
Thank you.
Vitens. So what does Vitens do? Could you explain it a little bit to us?
In the introduction, you already mentioned we produce drinking water. Well, that's sort of the core business and everything what we do. And we provide it to a third of the country, and many people say it's the best drinking water in the world.
You, of course, as well. I happen to live in this area, and I can say yes, I like it. So, what's special about drinking water?
Well, what you have to realize, and I think that's in every country the thing, drinking water as a industry only started with one main reason in mind, and that is the health of people. People got sick from using their local water source, and that's why drinking water companies were created. And still today, most important thing of what we do is daily checking the amount of germs in the drinking water distribution. Now, if you're not sure about this, and it happens in a lot of countries where they can't, where you really can't rely on your checking mechanisms, then you add some chemicals like chlorine to kill off germs and at least make sure that you don't get sick drinking the water. We don't have to do that because we have a very intricate system of checks with more than 1,000 samples per day over a whole distribution that we daily check in our laboratory. And that's why we can provide the drinking water within the standard without adding chemicals.
So I can get rid of my filter, the water filter in the fridge, right?
In fact, you should.
Yeah, I should, actually. Yeah.
The chance that you introduce germs with your own system is larger than that you would ever find something introduced by us. So
yeah, we better get rid of the filter.
At home, you cannot measure for all those data points that Vitens is collecting. Yeah. So it's also then perfectly safe to drink tap water when you're on holiday in the Netherlands.
There are some guests in our country that would smell the water. They won't smell the famous chlorine smell and decide that this poor country is not able to buy some chlorine for itself. No, you really have to. You can rely on our drinking water and enjoy the taste. There are some wells that we use. We use groundwater. There are some wells that are also used by bottled water companies. You actually can purchase the same water in a bottle than you, in our territory, get from your own tap at home.
Okay.
The only difference is the price. So,
and a convenient container. So how much do I pay for that?
well, it's a markup of a whopping 1,000 times.
1,000.
So
Wow.
here in the Netherlands, 1,000 liters, cubic meter, will cost you €1.10.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, try to get mineral water from the grocery store at
Yeah, you
price.
can use you buy the bottle once, but you can
reuse
reuse it
Yeah.
with your own tap water there.
Yeah.
I can start a mineral water company in my home then when if I ever get fed up with fiber.
Our
Yeah.
own water. Yeah.
Interesting. So, but you mentioned it is water is then drinking water. That's food supply chain. So it's really important. It's probably lots of regulations, lots of how do
Absolutely. So I think in every country, also here, we have some sectors that are regarded as a vital part, a critical sector. Within the Netherlands, there are even two categories. So vital and even more vital, like energy, our whole systems around dikes, but also drinking water. They are on the left part of that list. So more vital than vital, because it includes the danger of death if something goes wrong.
So that means that the company, the culture in the company probably is really towards no risk.
Yeah.
That must be very good news for a CISO.
Absolutely. So that whole part of explaining why you shouldn't accept risk is not the challenge of a CISO in a drinking water company. A lot of the regulation already requires you to do so. So we have a risk stance that says as low as reasonably possible. Means that the trade-off of cost versus risk avoidance is always moving towards risk avoidance, because that's by law the nature of what we do. Yeah.
And the role of digitization in the organization?
Yeah, it's quite a large part of what we do. Is everything is digitized, and I think the company is sort of if you make a model of the company, you can divide it in three different things. One part is like every other company's the office environment. So that's quite middle of the road. Then we are also a large business to consumer operation, like any other B2C. And people need to pay their bill or have a complaint, etc. But then the real vital part is how we operate our water purification factories and the distribution system. And that's with and that's a part with industrial control systems. And that's of course the part that we need to protect most.
And harder to protect.
Sure.
Since it's there are no regular updates to pumps.
Yeah, okay. So the first part is what do you do when everything goes wrong? Business continuity. And we are in one lucky area where there is an analog component to our operation. We can do without computers. Not for very long, because you have to go on the bicycle, go to all these purification plants and switch on pumps on and off manually.
Yeah.
Or we can do so. We have that procedure in place, and that's sort of the safety net under everything.
So if really things go really south, you shut off all systems, and we can still drink water and still safe.
So we can do our operations, but we can't provide the data in the laboratory anymore. So then you need to boil your own water before you consume. But it's the same water, but then without a guarantee from a laboratory. But even so, then since that water is there, so some other hygiene in the country is still provided, and that's an important thing to realize. That's the first thing we need to put in place. And that's also sort of the first thing you will do when, let's say, a heavy risk is introduced or a breach, you can switch off.
Yeah, and I think also we have seen that now the threat landscape is moving more towards, at least for the state actors, to gain foothold into this, kind of critical infrastructures, and of course targeting OT. I think I don't know if any of you is aware, but like for example the NTC Vulcan leak that happened recently, where basically a Moscow-based security contractor, when the war in Ukraine started, some insider was not really happy, leaked more than 5,000 documents. And aside from all the tools that they used something that is called Crystal 2V, which is basically a cyber warfare training platform. And what we learned from there is that they are studying ahead how OT components are working and OT networks are working, because that will give them an advantage on cyber warfare when it starts. I mean, can you imagine you manage to poison or the water of a whole city? It's a big problem.
Yeah, so you can basically destabilize a whole nation by shutting down or harming the critical sector. It's nice to know that we also practice incident management on a very large scale with this threat in mind. Last year, there was this nationwide easy door practice, where all critical infrastructure participated with 80 plus companies and over 1,000 of persons on 3 days together in one big war game.
Oh, that's
exactly
nice.
With this actor, a state actor, with a third-party vulnerability and breach in mind. All fictional, of course, but played out with a high realism.
Yeah, but I think it's really important, because a lot of times the lesson learned from incident response is also that many companies, they don't have muscle memory or playbooks in place for when something is going to happen. And that's the same reason why we do like fire drill, for example, like just because you need to be prepared, and it's really,
you need
important.
To practice. Yeah,
you need to practice.
And also improve your playbooks. One thing that might be nice to, as a takeaway from this talk, what I learned over various practices is that in your response plan, you might assume that something else is still working. But when the state actor is attacking your nation, you're not the only company that's harmed.
Yeah, you mentioned we have to rely on boiling water then, but what if the gas is also not there, or the electricity is down, or so then we can boil?
Yeah,
maybe
lighters.
Lighters.
And that's why it's advised that you have some container of drinking water stored in your cellar, next to the batteries and the radio. So there is there is always levels of escalations in the incident. So we practice the highest level, and in that scenario, it's advised that you have some storage at home for food and drink and batteries. But in the normal sense, you want to
there's a gap in my personal security at home. I'm going to fix it tonight.
You have like a lot of people in the US. This I think they're called preppers. They're the one that they just basically
everybody
hoard
should prep
things,
a little.
and just a little bit.
A little prepping is
not too much. Like you don't need a bunker, underground bunker, but
So, but you mentioned basically third parties a couple of times. That we're talking about the supply chain. I'm guessing you're not creating your own software, not creating your own PLC. So there's lots there. How do you define the supply chain?
Yeah, anything with a vendor, and that means that I don't make a very large difference between risk management within our own company or outside of the company. There's some intermediate part as well, with contractors, for instance. What we do with our vendors is we provide them the same policy as we impose on ourselves. So,
So the majority of your work is actually has vendors involved. So everything is more or less a supply chain. So it's not a special thing. It's a default thing.
It's a default thing.
Yeah, because we distinguish a couple of different. You can look at supply chains in a couple of different ways. One is I trust my data with another party, and then if that party gets breached, then my data in their custody is now gone or public. That's how many companies actually view supply chain attacks primarily. But for you, especially in the critical infrastructure, is different, I think, huh?
Yeah. So of course we also have an office environment, and I think in that scenario you will have about software as a service components, etc. Then it's all about data. The vital infrastructure is less about data because in essence ICS can produce a lot of data, but it's a real-time thing. So if all your data is gone, it doesn't matter. Availability is most important.
Yeah, it is more about control more than
absolutely
data.
And it provides the real-time data to itself. So there we operate ourselves, but all the components, all the hardware, all the software is provided by somebody else. And especially if you talk about state actors, you have to assume breach.
Yeah,
they might already be in.
Yeah, one of the threats we prepared is SolarWinds. Did it play any role in your organization?
For half an hour, when we were warned by the National Cybersecurity Center to look into it, and luckily we had the right software version. So that ended our incident. Yeah.
That's great news, because we've seen different. Lucas, shall we dive into a little bit into SolarWinds?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, SolarWinds it attacked 18,000 high-profile environments, right? Like the U.S. government and Fortune 500 companies, and it was really everywhere. So what happened there?
So of course we're going to discuss this a bit more in depth during the deep dive. But for people that are not familiar with SolarWind, in this case we call it SolarWind attack, but it's actually targeted software that's called Orion. That was a software for management and monitoring of IT infrastructures in the cloud and on premises for companies. This attack was really sophisticated. It was done by the U.S. government attributed this to to Russia, to a state actor that's called Cozy Bear. We heard about them already in the previous
for the Outlook vulnerability.
For the Outlook vulnerability. It was really sophisticated. The problem about this is that the state actors infiltrated SolarWind, and they managed to sneak inside one of the libraries some malicious code that basically created a backdoor, and it was distributed with legitimate updates. And as you will see in the deep dive, they also put a lot of checks in place to make sure that this went undetected and blend in really well with the legitimate traffic that normally the audience or SolarWind will produce. So
it's really hard to defend against these kind of things. You said assume breach. That's the only thing you can do in these scenarios. Well, we'll learn that there are actually a couple of things that you can do. We'll discuss it in more depth in the deep dive, indeed.
Yeah. But that's really difficult, especially when you have like state actors, because they have money, they have time, they're backed by the state, so they can invest really a lot of time in an attack. So that's quite complex. It's difficult.
You can see in Lucas' eyes that he actually likes these kind of attacks.
Not really. It depends on which side are you of the attack.
Well, maybe we should talk a little bit about Log4j then, because there was one that kept us awake.
Yes.
Was that the same
that
for
was
you?
A lot of work.
That definitely kept us awake. So I mentioned that we have this risk stance as low as reasonably possible. That meant that we had to check everything. And of course, we started with the internet-facing applications, but we went methodically through our whole landscape. And it was a great exercise in asset management and inventory management.
So you thank the attackers in this case?
Absolutely.
Okay. That's also.
So you still carry the pros about that inventory that you had to do?
Yeah, I think it is like a joke of you thank the attacker. It's okay if you're attacked, because then you stay awake.
Yeah.
So at least you practice and...
You have to stay awake and practice. And otherwise it's just a theory that once you need it, will not come out.
No. Well, we'll have another deep dive in the upcoming weeks about Log4j in detail. Let's briefly talk about this now. I mean, Log4j it kept our security operations center awake because we had to help so many customers to figure out what the impact of it was. But it was really everywhere. I mean, you could change the name of your iPhone, and then you could detect that Apple headquarters actually was also was also breachable. Could you explain a little bit how that works?
Yes, this I remember the sleepless night about this one. This was December 2021. It's still here now, but no, well, it was quite. It had a huge impact. So the funny thing is that it was found through a video game, so Minecraft. So basically, they found out that. Putting a special string in the chat or changing your character name could allow remote code execution on the server or cause a denial of service. This happened because of Log4j, and Log4j is a Java library that is used for logging, and you can log, like for example, in the case of Minecraft, they were logging also the chat, so it was going through the logs.
Dull, from a developer's perspective, a real dull subject. You just take a library, and everybody happens to use the same one.
Yes, and the problem is also that a lot of people, they don't even know that they're using that library because it relies, it's on so many softwares and so many programs that sometimes developers also, they don't know that they have that library. So it was basically really everywhere. This, as you mentioned, we will explain it in depth during the deep dive. But basically, just simply writing a string will allow code to be executed, wherever it was logged. So basically, this happened with LDAP RMI outbound connection. And for example, for us, when this happened, it took us really, it kept us really busy because we had to assess all of our customers that had if they were affected by the vulnerabilities or if they were running the vulnerable version of the library. And a fun fact, of course, all our customers that they had a zero trust best practice in place, for us was way easier to detect if they were affected or not. And of course, what we did, we started to narrow down or close more the security rules that will allow that specific traffic.
Yeah, but you mentioned the best asset management, asset inventory exercise. For us, it was a push to customers who weren't in control of their outbound network flows to finally get that done, because it does require a certain degree of courage for an IT manager to say, yes, okay, make this deny rule there.
Yeah, that's sometimes you allow everything and you don't know what's going to be blocked after, so it can have a big impact.
It's always our push to get that done, but it's not always, and the maturity of organizations vary. Yeah. So in the most mature organization in this sense, we were really quickly done, even though if they had...
It was a lot of work, but and actually what we did as well, we used our EDR, for the customers that we managed with their EDR. We used them to scan all the endpoints to see if they actually had the vulnerable library, and that helped as well, because people say, hey, you need to patch here because
we could really quickly generate a to-do list of systems and software that needs to be patched. You need that then,
Yeah,
it's not like update this version of Windows to this patch level or so, because all the different software pieces had different versions that you need to patch to. And how do you keep track of it? It was crazy. Yeah, let's not have that. Well, let's do such a practice more, but not in this time frame then.
No, not every year.
No, exactly. Matthijs, you mentioned that your internal rules, your internal technical requirements, basically, you also apply to vendors.
Yep.
I can imagine that if you go to a really large vendor, that they will say, listen, we have a SOC 2, it's sufficient.
Well, the most mature vendors will open up also when their yearly regularly checks find some mistakes. And what I'm always looking for is whether they have a good management system in place, that it's actually producing mistakes and corrections with a continuous improvement. And then I can rely. If it's just a piece of paper, you can rely me, here I'm compliant, that's not saying anything for me. And on the other hand, if you go into the details, it all starts with people. Can you trust the persons touching your equipment? And even if you're large or small, then we apply everybody to the same rules. And we, especially when it comes down to industrial control systems, every person, either Vitens or contractor, needs to have this yearly certification.
Like a personal background check.
Absolutely, yeah. And after that, we will go into contact with the vendor. Now, if it's a larger vendor, you can actually rely on their reports. And in my experience, they open up more and more. But in our purchase contract, there's always the right to audit that I can exercise.
Yeah, I can imagine that if you are a large, say telecommunication company and you have thousands and thousands of customers, it's impossible for such a company to have specific rules for each and every customer, right? Is that something that is a field of tension for you? And then I mean, that's the whole reason we have certifications like ISO 27001, SOC 2, FedRAMP.
But in that certification, for instance, a telco, and in the Dutch telcos, I have good experience with them. They will actually transparently report what was found by their external auditor, what they're going to do to fix it, and give me the evidence. And that's all I need. Then I can rely on their work.
Yeah, so if the vendor is mature enough, I think I hear you say, then I don't have to investigate myself or go into the details like this is your password policy, this is your certificate rotation, but you can then rely on a certification like SOC 2, and but as long as if you get the feedback, so you have some feeling.
If the report is too slick, then you have to assume it's a watermelon, green on the outside and red on the inside. Real transparency and honesty, and nobody's perfect. And as we know, like with Log4j, all these landscapes are in constant flux. So we'll also introduce new vulnerabilities. And for me, it's a good sign if there's a high flow of found vulnerabilities and corrections made.
Yeah, also because like many software are using open source libraries like this one, and that there will be vulnerabilities.
Yeah. But this is the larger companies. I mean, there's many companies who don't have a certification. Does that mean they cannot work with you?
Yeah, so if you're a very small company, it comes down to sort of the people check. Then most probably I'll ask you to be sort of a contractor and work on the inside under Vitens management. If it's a very small company that's providing a software as a service offer.
Yes, for example, for the
you can't prove that you have a yearly risk management procedure in place, etc., etc. You'll have a market, but I'm not in it.
Yeah,
you can't. Then it's impossible to be able to rely on such a service in a critical sector.
So a small company that delivers a PTO registration for your employees, for example, where they call in the sick days and all that. And if it's a really small SaaS company of 10 people, that can't be a supplier really then in critical infrastructure.
Well, that's on a part of more the company side, not the production.
Oh, one of the other three areas. Yeah, okay.
So that could be, but in this case, of course, then you have to check quite well what they do with the data, because then the unwanted event is a data breach, I think, with privacy as a risk. That needs to be checked as well. There's a law about privacy as well, but the critical part is a bit more firm.
Yeah. So it sounds like you have very gradual policy in place then. It really depends on the area in your organization, whether it's in OT or in the office or in your business to consumer environment. Probably how critical the assets are, or the kind of access that the company wants, and how mature they are.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there, and apparently it works very well, because I assume that in those practices, those companies also have to participate, right? And that all works. They do participate.
Yeah, sure, they do. Yeah. And the most important thing is that way before you start selecting your software and your vendor landscape and even the choice that you make of what do you want to digitize at all, or do you want to stay analog for a certain process, it really starts with a good risk assessment. And that's also why I think in the future we are quite a specific company with a risk tolerance that's reaching the 0 point, right? That makes that the role of CIO and CISO is actually the same role, because you provide software at lowest risk. You can't bolt on security afterwards. But I think
I'd like to know more about that in a minute, because that's a very interesting point you're making. Let's first, I promised the treasure hunt. So here it is. On screen right now, you see the code. I'll say it only once. It's 042402. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that Luca is currently wearing, please email it to code@threat-talks.com. And the first 200 people that respond get one. And while we are in the subject of threat, I wanted to briefly discuss one other thing that we haven't touched, which is another kind of thing. Actually, the biggest, we can't talk about supply chain attacks without mentioning the biggest one of last year, at least by the numbers. It's the MOVEit one. 60 million individuals were affected. Most of them related to the US government as well. It was really the largest by the numbers. What happened, Luca?
Yes, basically, first of all, what is MOVEit? I guess that's many companies have like some software that they use to safely transfer files or like confidential data, and this is one of those software that provide that service. So you use it to deliver something in a safe way, encrypted, like a file or some data. What happened is that this MOVEit software had a SQL injection. We explained SQL injection already in the past with one of our deep dives. I'm not going to go in depth now about that. We're going to do a deep dive about this as well. So if you're interested, you just please look at it. What made this basically really big is that the company that produced this software, MOVEit, they basically have also a special arrangement with the US government because they of course match some of the certification standards that they need to have for confidential data transfer, and therefore the attackers were able to put their hands on really confidential data. The attack was perpetrated by the Clop ransomware group, which is basically a cyber criminal group that is financially motivated. They usually do ransomware, data theft, and extortion attacks. And you might maybe remember them because in 2019 they were the one that placed a ransomware in the Maastricht University. So basically, it's a really well-known and sophisticated attacker. And as you mentioned before, this was like a big hit because, like, for example, the attack happened in May, and by July, basically, they already managed to hack into Maximus. That is one of the providers for healthcare in the US. And they breached data from 11 million patients, including the social security number and all this kind of things. So really private data.
CISO's nightmare. I mean, you...
I guess probably.
There's sensitive data. You trust a third party with this, a typical form of a supply chain attack. Yeah, and in this case, those certifications didn't get to the right end result, not being breached.
Yeah.
So... it's good to ask a little bit more transparency to your point.
Of course, but I think the thing we should always realize, there is a residual risk, and that's a fact of life.
Yeah.
So, prepare for the worst.
Yes, assume breached. Like you mentioned, like
you mentioned that for the CIO, the person who makes decisions on what software to buy, whether to go to MOVEit or whether to work with supplier or security operations center for that matter, should basically should be the same person as the CISO, maybe even, or at least do this from a risk management perspective. Can you explain a little bit how you see this and how you practice this?
I see those roles really. The answer lies in a great architecture, and a lot of problems that you run into were created, I think, years before you came into the job, right? And you step on the train with a lot of legacy, and not well thought out vendor landscape, complexity perhaps, just by trying to please every business owner with his own demands and requests. And I think the job of a CIO will move into more the C-level decisions way before you make software decisions. Like, what kind of company are we? What is our risk stance? What makes us unique? Where do we want to provide software? And where do we want to stay middle of the road? And I think for a lot of, we know that the threat landscape will increase. That means that for everything that's not unique to your company, you stay on standard. And it helps us if the whole community is on a certain standard with a certain vendor, for instance, then you're all in the herd. If someone is breached, some member in the herd will find out, and you can share that information together. And companies like yourselves and the other security.
So then you talk about the choice, for example, the choice which cloud provider to use to put your instances on, which email provider, those kind of things. Don't get too much.
Don't deviate from the standard. No. How do you provide your billing system? Everything that's pretty much undifferentiated for your unique offer. Keep it standard. And you can only do that if you, at the really start of thinking about your business, have the IT risk in view. And if you have a CISO, that's more like an operational CISO, providing risk assessments within the fiscal year, like, okay, those people should treat the data as such, and I want this risk to be managed. You miss out on this whole fundamental discussion. And I think there could be great risk if you don't have a good fundamental, well thought out architecture in the coming years.
Security by design, right? So that's
so it's organizational, architectural by design. So it's also, what do you rely on software and what not? What kind of departments and people? Even before you think about security by design in the software, sort of organizational.
Security
by design.
Do you think, like, for example, like for a company like Vitens, I think of course you go just for the risk, so that's great. But do you think that, for example, as we have seen with the SolarWinds attack in the US, CISA held the CISO and the executive personally accountable for the outcome of the attack? Do you think that maybe merging the two functions, CIO and CISO, you might maybe for other companies miss a bit the debate between like business strategy and maybe it's going to be only security focused decision in the end, while when it's mixed, when it's split, you should compromise?
Could be. There are, like, tech companies have a lot of technical departments. Then let's say the one that introduces risk is spread out, then you should have a nice counterbalance, also reporting to the CEO. In companies like ours, then let's say the digital tech is more focused. Then you make sure that person is absolutely also accountable for the risk he introduces. And missing out on a good debate, of course you have four eyes, right? It's your security organization is a different one than, for instance, basic operations or development. So you want to make sure that the debate is there, but the great debate is within let's say a more balanced CIO function that has a debate before a strategic debate with his business counterparts. On a strategic level, I think that's where you really can manage the risk way up front.
Yeah,
You talk about risk. Many companies have there's different ways you can look at risk. Cybersecurity risk is always hard to estimate, I'd say. Of course, we have multiple lines of defense where against cyber threats, and the very first line, of course, is the Lucas of the world that make sure that that firewalls are properly configured. How do you see this? How's that connection between the risk that the CIO on a very high level is going to measure or at least manage?
Yeah, so these lines of defense theory that really helps you to govern your risk and make sure that there's also on the way you make your company choices. There are also checks and balances with a higher and higher level of checking. So the first line is always your own operation. The second line is the internal staff department introducing some checks and balances. The third is then internal audit. Then there is even outside your company a fourth, external audit. And in my case, there's even a fifth. That's a regulatory body of our department. And they all come in. And then there is a risk that you look into this theoretical 5 lines of defense and think that every line is a department. What happens then is that your best people will shift to the checking and creating reports. And actually, your best people should be in the first line of defense, avoiding reports, right? So we were quite far with organizing ourselves to the 3 lines model, those 3 lines internal. I introduced back to get the best people in the first line and avoid those risks way before they come in.
And since you are both the CIO and the CISO, that was even possible, I'm guessing then.
Yeah, sure. And then I had to introduce the checks and balances and make sure that you have some traceability of somebody checking and introducing vulnerability scans and somebody else fixing stuff, but making sure that that's not a theoretical exercise that's going to be more of a bureaucracy, but really hands-on, every week, everybody around the table, and go about all the points that we found in detail and fix them straight away.
Any final thoughts for CIOs and CISOs around in this respect?
Yeah, I think the best thing is to, on one hand, have your management system in place with the plan, do, check, act, but make it fun. Please make it fun. It's a great job to be in there. And on the other hand, don't overestimate your own ability to manage complexity. So keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, both my guests. Matthijs, thank you, Luca, for all those valuable insights. In conclusion, there's a lot that happens in the supply chain attack. It's a real thing. It's like for Vitens even the default thing to think in a chain. And we heard a couple of great insights on how CISO and CIO should be the same, or at least work together, how you can manage risk. And of course, the fact that you can drink tap water in the Netherlands very safely. So please do next time you visit the Netherlands. Thank you to our guests. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. If you liked this talk, please like it in the platform that you're consuming it from, and also send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. You can put that to team@trash-talks.com, and we will respond to that immediately. And also, please subscribe and check the notification bell. So next time, that's in a week, you will get the next episode. And the next couple of episodes will be deep dives, a little bit more technical. And after that, we will have a talk like this. Thank you once again. And from the Security Operations Center floor here at OnToIt, thank you very much and see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Threat Talks, a podcast by OnToIt Cybersecurity and M6. Did you like what you heard? Do you want to learn more? Follow Threat Talks to stay up to date on the topic of cybersecurity.